But in that moment of recognition, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. And in the spirit of Mary, who pondered the word in her own moment of invitation, let us pray for her intercession. Hail Mary,
full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
I love the sentence in Scripture, she pondered the invitation. You've been invited to this retreat experience to ponder the invitation. And pondering doesn't take place in seconds. I somehow think that when we read the gospel text, that she pondered these things. It sounded like she was invited to be mother of the Lord and within 4 seconds said yes. We are aware already of an interjection in that phrase of the Scriptures. She wondered how this would be possible. She may have been engaged but not married. How would it be possible that she would conceive? I think the pondering took a while. Anyone who has been making decisions about lifestyles for the rest of their life, I'm going to get married. I don't think you make that decision in a second. I mean, some people do. You know, the tribunal is filled with results. But the reality is most people take time to ponder. To ponder vocation, to ponder profession, to ponder retirement, all those kind of things that we face on the basis of our life experiences. It takes time. I think Mary also checked it out. If you think of that wonderful moment of the visitation to Elizabeth, she knew the family story. Elizabeth was a dried-out cow. She would never have a kid. And all of a sudden, she's pregnant. Let's take our jackass taxi and drive down and visit. And when she gets there, the mother of the Lord has come to me. And for the first moment, she has verified that what she heard was not a dream. What she heard was the truth. That she herself had conceived. So all of that didn't take place in seconds, although to read it in the Scriptures or to hear it at a liturgy, profoundly professed by a deacon during the liturgy, makes it sound very quick. I would suggest she took her time. Yesterday we began looking at the basis of a spiritual response. And then as I thought about that question of spiritual time, I think that's not the correct phrase. You don't have a human life and then a spiritual life. You have a life. The spirit and the humanity work simultaneously. They intersect each other continually. But maybe to get a handle on it, we do the dissecting and put the slide. We put the human slide and we look through the eyeglass and the lenses and we focus in. Or we might put another, that's the spiritual side. A good scientist realizes it's the one slide slice taken from a human person's experience or body, looked at from a different perspective. What I want us to do is to get those two perspectives together. You don't have a spiritual life and a human life. You have one life. It's your life. And the Spirit works through the human and the human works through the Spirit. Thus, the emphasis placed last night, at least I was attempting to do that we need to be a people who are rooted in some fashion in the humanity of our history and our experience, because that's the environment in which you are now called. Let's flesh that out a bit. Let's have a conversation together. What do you hear when you hear those words? We live in a history, not a past, but in a present history. You were born and are inserted at this moment in human history. And that's an extremely important perspective to keep in mind. And you weren't inserted in another piece of history. This is your moment in history. So what's going on here in your history? What touches you? What affects you? Any suggestions? We could do it in small groups, but what happens in small groups, it becomes chappy.
Rapid technological changes. Rapid technological changes.
Rapid technological changes.
Growth.
Okay. How does that affect your life?
I remember I had a little small, it wasn't much of a problem. It's had all my calendars and things on there. And I would have fun. Smartphone, and then you don't do anything. It's amazing.
So technology, it kind of puts us all together in one little piece. And hit a button, you're talking to the person in another place. I think one thing I hear a lot of chanceries complaining about, and that is the Vatican has discovered instant technology. You no longer have to wait for a boat to bring a transmission of something from one place to the other. They're asking questions right now about what's going on in their deacon program.
I would say that the rapid technological change precipitates the instant communication worldwide so that we know what happens in Afghanistan now, and they know what we've done as well.
Does that affect you at all? I mean, you know it intellectually, I know it. We certainly watch it. Just before I came over, I was listening to Sirius, and I was listening specifically to CNN, and there's a huge parade going on with the Red Sox. Million people lined up in Boston and cheered them on for their wonderful gift. And thankfulness, if you will. Thankfulness that after the horrific bombing that took place, we finally have something to rally us in a different way to heal that wound of division. Well, that was a very insightful line. Wow. A Red Sox parade, and it's talking about healing division. Perhaps that has something to do about your. Go ahead.
I was maybe looking ahead last night. I was looking at Pope John's address at the close of the council, and it struck me that what he's talking about, the close of the council doesn't bring their work to an end. They're going back, not like in the old days when things would stop and they'd have to come back together. And the sentence he said, the conditions of modern life, however, make it easy to have rapid communication on all types of businesses, and that struck me. I was talking about how rapid communication was then, and now we're talking about the instantaneous communication we have now.
What took place in LAX yesterday, we were all caught up in it. I'm coming down the steps, and Paulson has got this TV blasting with a priest from Africa, Father John, who I guess is about 80 years old or something, and they're watching her glued in it. So I walked in and I was watching LAX, thinking to myself, oh my God, Krause, you're going to get phone calls. Why? Because Tuesday we're leading Tom Nanchi and I are leading a crew to the Holy Land. And some interesting questions. A call from one of the participants, let's see, with this action, will we actually take off from LAX? Will we actually, how I'm assuming that the security will even be harder by next week Tuesday, I would assume. And then, of course, Israelis bombed a small Russian boat in a harbor in Syria. Will this change our plans, Monsignor? So I called New York to the tourist company, and they said, at this point, all systems go. Matter of fact, Monsignor, you're probably going to be far more safer today because of that incident, because the whole nation is on guard. Ooh, that's very encouraging. Yes, please, David.
Yeah, so back to the technology. What's happened is there are all kinds of blogs, for instance, out there with people with very diverse opinions, and I think that starts to divide. But what really concerns me about that is nobody knows what the credentials or the thought processes or any of those sorts of things that are in these blogs, but we put them all at the same level because there's no way to discern where they're coming from. So the instant communication and then almost an anonymous, post-anonymous
Right now, the FBI is in New Jersey at this gentleman's home, the fellow who crossed all of yesterday, and just learned that he had sent a few days before emails to members of his family, and they reported to their police department that there's something going on that isn't normal here. So it's interesting how that can become a source of communication. Please.
Yeah, but doesn't this instant communication also lead into saturation for a person?
Sure. How does that affect your spiritual human life? So what I'm trying to talk about is your history right now is talking about rapid communication. And certainly we're caught in that. My question is, what does that do in terms of your identification as a human person, Christian? And how does that reality play into when you're giving homilies or ministering to your people? They're caught up in the same reality. You used a good word. People that so oversaturated, it's the same people who come to the front door of your church. If we talk about Catholics oversaturated, because the world and the environment that they're in is oversaturated. We can't keep up on top of it. There's so much out there. My favorite line is, if we think the church is in a divisive movement, well, why are we surprised? The people that walk through that front door are living in our world, and our world is a hell of a divided place. That's why we're divided inside. It's the same people who try to bring spiritual and human together. That's our task. Not when they come to church, I'm nearer to thee, my God, and outside, fight, 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 fight. A lot of this, healthcare, no, the battle. Just incredible. How do we bring that together is what John 23 is talking about. He begins by inviting us somehow to begin our reflection on the gospel through the integrity of our human history. That the only way we can get in touch with Christ's word now is by being sensitive to what is going on in our world now. And not just the larger global world. What's going on now in your diaconal world? Stan?
I think from my own experience, we don't even have electricity. I am always out of the loop. Well, and I think most of the poor are really in that situation. So that so many things are being decided for them without them knowing what's going on. It takes time for me and too much effort to really even make an email. I have to go to the city, and usually there's always brown out. So it's just that's another part.
And part of the word you use is also important. That part of our conversation about the world in which we're in is who takes time to consult you. We speak of the deacons traditionally being the eyes and ears of the bishop. Really? I'm not being facetious. I'm not being facetious. Sometimes we just forget that there has to be a conversation. That decisions can't be made just in an ivory upstairs room. We heard in this little video that we watched yesterday that one of the frustrations of Cardinal Roncalli, a lot of good people work here, but they're not in touch with what's going on out there. That's a clerical disease. We get so caught up in our own individual ministerial frame of reference that we don't have that living contact out there. And that living contact has to, in some way, come into the conversation of who you are. Some people, when they prepare for homilies, will invite some of their fellow parishioners to come together, and they just share ideas. What's the folks in the parish thinking about? How might I apply this gospel uniquely to St. Mary's in Walnut Creek, as distinct of how I would bring it to Santa Maria? There's great radical change between the two places. They're not the same. Same humanity, not same social structures. And that has to be kept in a constant balance as you begin to think about what are the folk, What is this humanity, spirituality component that the gospel requires?
There's a little more your planet. There's a little more your planet. Going back to what you started at the beginning, nowadays there's no excuse for not pondering. And you have all this information. When I started being a deacon, had books here, books there, books there. Now with all this information, it's all there. It's out there. You just have to look for it. And once you find it, you have to ponder it. And you don't have to ride a jackass to Los Angeles and find out what's going on down there. It's out there. We have to make the effort to go out there and get that information.
So the point that he's making is simply the reality that there's a lot of stuff that you can get your hand on very quickly. You don't have to go to the library. It's an instantaneous ability of picking up information. Yeah.
But isn't it more important to find out in your neighborhood how many parents have to work 2 or 3 jobs to just feed their families? And so the children are left alone. They hardly have any supervision. So to just be present to those children, that they have a safe place to go, that is very prevalent at the moment.
Again, you're talking about getting in touch with the history of the place in which you are participating in the gospel, having touch with the people of God in that circumstance. But that's not an easy contact. I mean, it's already simply saying, you've got to want to do it. But we can get caught up. I mean, I'm certainly some of you who still have to keep a professional life together with your ministerial life. You haven't reached that plateau called retirement. Sometimes you have to be more preoccupied with the professional side, which should get you closer to the reality of the people anyways. Because most people are working. Please.
I think we were talking about the amount of information that's available. And we dialogue about these issues. And sometimes we forget that we just need to walk out from the street corner and actually see the homeless person standing there. Or to speak to the issues like maybe the poor being denied food stamps while we build this monstrous military complex, finding that more important than feeding the poor to the poor. And I'm just saying that we're challenged not to get trapped in doctrinal discussions, but simply to touch people. And I think that's what Pope Francis is, and of course, my impression, that I think that's what he's challenging us to do, is to be pastoral.
Thomas Merton is another example of a person who decides to become a Trappist monk. And on one occasion, he had to go into Louisville for a medical examination process. And he was standing at a corner, and he writes very pointedly, "As I stood there and watched this humanity pass by me, it dawned on me, they're me. They're my sister, they're my brother." For the first time, he got in contact from his Adoramus Dei Christi, monastic prayer and silence and separation. And all of a sudden, he discovers the reality that this is me. He wrote after that an inner communication to the community of Gethsemane. It eventually got published in the title of a book that some of you may know or read, The Confessions of a Guilty Bystander. And what he simply told the monks of Gethsemane, it's very easy for us to come here and raise our voices in prayer to God. But unless you be connected with the folk out there, then we're just guilty bystanders. That always has sunk into me. I have a great admiration for him in terms of his writings, and find him to be a great spiritual guru for me. It may not be for you. But the reality is I reflect on that and become aware of the fact of how many times have I allowed myself to be just a guilty bystander. And if I allow that to take root in me, it does do some kind of dissection between the humanity and spirituality that I profess is one in me. The integrity of our call to be disciples. Jim?
One of the things I'm concerned with is that we become a little too focused, and it's easy to do with the variety of things that are available to us, that we forget the other side of things. So
you're putting really out there the search of people like Dominic. We speak of Dominican spirituality. St. Dominic's approach to his human spiritual integrity was education. Study, get to the depth of the truth, search. Franciscan spirituality. Brother Sun, Sister Moon. The bird watcher, the environmentalist. Unless you get out of your mind and just see the beauty as an instrument. Then Jesuit spirituality. It's a little bit of this and that, it's kind of salt and pepper. But nevertheless, the whole Ignatian quality is getting in touch with the gospel as articulated in yourself. So if you made a 30-day retreat, you spend most of the time a lot of inner searching, guided by the scriptures, enabling you to see the glory of God. And of course we see it in Francis, because he is by nature a Jesuit, supposedly. I read this, that Bishop Barber said when he was introduced to the Pope at the end of his school for new bishops, he happened to mention to Francis, you know, I'm a Jesuit too. And the Pope looked at him and said, oh, you've got the virus, huh? It's a true line. You've got the virus. It's a whole different how you go at this human spiritual concept of the environment in which we're in. Totally different. Javier.
One of the biggest concerns I have is, yes, we have oversaturation, but it's a lot of people who are left out. People who cannot afford the technology, people who are illiterate about, you know, how to use this technology. And to me, one of the main things that we should do is, when you're talking about this, you know, epitaph. The epitaph and the baptismal. Listen and speak up to the ones who are this technology, this oversaturation of information is not available. Work in your environment specifically.
Good. Larry?